College football nerds, we are here, preview season. Got a couple of weeks before football starts, and we're going to talk Michigan football with y'all. And it's been a minute, Josh, but we're here talking Michigan football. Obviously, I got Josh with me getting nerdy with y'all. And just a little note, a little housekeeping, because you probably haven't gotten notifications. We go kind of hibernate in the off season. We're back, and so make sure your notification bell is hit. And we did a series on NIL and transfers and kind of where the state of college football is right now, and I think that y'all would love it. Got it in podcast form if you want to listen to the whole thing in one shot, or 4 videos chopped up for you. So just check out our home page. What am I drinking tonight, Josh? I've got Old Forester 1920. Pretty good stuff. 115 proof, so we're going to try to go easy on it tonight, Josh. Okay, so this is going to be an interesting conversation because we got some things that are positive, some things that are negative. And in our pre-discussion about this, you were more good cop than I was, which is interesting. The first thing I want to talk about, Josh, is the schedule. And Michigan fans, stick with me. This is going to sound a little negative. It's really just because we hold y'all to a certain standard, but we're going to bring it back. So hang with us. Don't get angry in the comments just yet. I think you're going to like what we have to say. So, Josh, we have been on this channel very vocal or very much on Twitter about how much praise we want to give Michigan dating back, a decade or more, with great out-of-conference games, great Power 5 out-of-conference games. Michigan, Georgia's good at this, Clemson, Ohio State, Texas, Oklahoma, and Alabama, all really good at this. For the next 2 years, they don't play a Power 5 team out of conference. Now, I think that UCLA, y'all let me know in the comments, I think UCLA backed out. And that's why, but they're going for 2 years. They don't play another Power 5 until 2024. So that irks me a little bit, and it's because I want to see Michigan football and that brand stepping outside of conference and playing somebody. This isn't a, hey, you're chickening out sort of thing. It's it hurts me because I want to see them play somebody out of conference, and there's tradition there, and that's a little disappointing. But I want to separate that disappointment from, and this is where I'm going to bring you in, that disappointment from this concept that, like, they've got an easy schedule. Because on paper right now, it looks a little bit easy. They've got an easy schedule, so they need to be, they can't drop a game or whatever. Talk about how teams with an easy schedule can still make the playoffs just fine. We've got 2018 Alabama had a joke of a schedule. Clemson has always had a joke of a schedule pretty much. Talk about how that is not a barrier for them to get in the playoffs, but they might be judged a little bit differently. Why don't you get into that and I'll shut up.
It doesn't really matter what we say or think on our channel or how people like us think about teams. All that really matters at the end of the day is whether or not you're in a position for the College Football Playoff Committee to put you in the playoff. And the thing is, if you're in the Big Ten or the SEC, it doesn't really matter if you're in the East or the West Division, what your schedule's like in that division, who you get from the other side. If Georgia runs the table and they win the SEC championship, they're going to the playoff. Period. End of story. End of discussion. If Georgia drops a game and wins the SEC championship, they're going to the playoff. And you know what? Sometimes the SEC isn't very good, on the Eastern Division at least. And, a lot of times it doesn't matter, as we've seen. And so I think, the fact that Michigan maybe does have a weaker schedule for them, and as we said, we praise them a lot normally for having a P5 out of conference. I'm not thrilled with the fact that they've gone 2 years in a row without that. But from a playoff hope perspective, it really does just kind of come down to beating Ohio State and getting in. And a lot of times that actually makes you the most dangerous team for someone like Ohio State because you can kind of focus on that game. Now, that said, I do want to be clear, when we're evaluating Michigan early in the season, when we're talking about them, we'll start doing, I don't know if we'll do it immediately, but we'll start doing sort of a top 25 or outlook on teams, maybe top 15, whatever. We're going to be more critical of Michigan early in the year than a lot of people are probably going to like us to be. And that's because the schedule is going to hide a lot of warts. When you start with Colorado State, Hawaii, UConn, Maryland, those aren't good teams. They just don't have the same level roster as the top 10 world that Michigan is currently residing in. And I think there's a reality that you get all the way down to October 1st playing at Kinnick, and all of a sudden you get this Iowa game that's going to be a totally different beast. But I'll say even then, when you run further down the schedule, and frankly, this may be something of an indictment on the Big Ten. I'm not sure how good the offenses are in the Big Ten. So all year, I'm just telling you this now because I want you guys to understand where my head's going to be at. I'm going to be looking at Michigan on both sides of the ball and really trying to pick out little details on where I want to project them. And now a little bit of foreshadowing here in a couple different ways. One, I actually think Michigan may be ranked a little too low in the early top 25s. I don't quite see why they fell as far as they did. But two, I think people coming out of that Iowa game may have an overestimation of where, maybe where that defense is, maybe an underestimation where the offense is. And I think it's going to take weeks and weeks for people to really wrap their head around what Michigan is as a football team.
Yeah, and something that's kind of irks me about how people are looking at Michigan this year, and frankly, how they're looking at Ohio State, is they're making all these negative assumptions about Michigan and all of these positive assumptions about Ohio State. And like, we got killed a little bit from Ohio State fans in our preview because we're like, hey, defense, still a question mark. And like, for all the good that Ohio State has done the last couple of years, the one thing that they've struggled with is physical teams. Guess what? Michigan's still going to be that team. That's going to be their DNA. But I feel like a lot of national reporters who cover this sport are saying, okay, Michigan got it out of their system. They got their championship year, and now they're just going to be okay with, taking a step back and letting Ohio State kind of reign again, in which, that might happen. But until we see that Ohio State can stop the run, until we see that Ohio State can be dominant on both sides of the line of scrimmage, we can't assume that Michigan's not going to at least, have a puncher's chance or maybe even be favored going into that game. So I want you to talk about, like, is it kind of weird how people are treating Michigan? Or maybe I'm just feeling it and it's, it's just because it's the off season, but do you get that sense too?
I definitely think really from a national perspective that people are just kind of assuming Ohio State will go back to being Ohio State and Michigan will be going back to being Michigan. And one of the big things that I've always said in a lot of different contexts is, past results shouldn't really impact your future expectations. It doesn't matter how many times you roll black on a roulette wheel, the next roll is still 50-50. And yeah, you've got coaches that sort of set precedents. You've got program tradition. There's a lot of reasons to think things may rebound. But I can't really remember a time when Harbaugh had a Michigan team that I thought was played particularly unphysical. It's not like last year was outside their identity. The offense has had a lot of issues. A lot of that was due to really bad quarterback play. And most of the things I can point to, bad skill position talent at times we were critical of. I don't think we were wrong. Those things have kind of sorted. And on the other side, with Ohio State, their main problem was I didn't feel like physically they held up on either side of the ball. And I'm not really sure exactly what rationale people have for thinking that's just going to magically go away. There's enough talent in the wings to think it can, but it didn't last year. So when I look at this, maybe this is a time.
Well, they think a coordinator is going to solve all those problems. And you kind of tweeted and kicked the hornet's nest in saying that not sure that that's going to happen.
Yeah, it was a tweet I pointed out that, there's all this expectation from Knowles that comes in from Oklahoma State. The guy's had one top 30 defense in yards per play in his career, 12 years as a defensive coordinator. And 5 of the 12 years, he was 99th or worse in yards per play. Now, you can say that's because he was at Duke and Oklahoma State, and you can argue that all you want. But, until last year, this is a guy's best season, had been 37th. So, there's a lot of reasons just to be skeptical would be the point. And look, there's plenty of reasons to be skeptical with Michigan, but there's answers too. So maybe I was going to say let's get in the roster, but maybe let's take a step back and let's talk coaches, right? Because the talk right now is losing coordinators, and I've seen a lot of different narratives on both sides. One is this idea that, well, you lose coordinators, but you keep the scheme. Well, first, that's hogwash. Alabama's run the same scheme the entire time in the Saban era. They run the same basic concepts, terminology. Defense has been almost the same every coordinator, and they have definitely been up or down with coordinators. That's just the way football works. People teach, operate, call plays differently. But on the same vein, the two of us have always been critical of Gaddis. We didn't have a lot of faith in him. 2019, 2020, it seemed like we were kind of right to be critical of him. And then last year, he turns out a great season and is suddenly out the door to Miami. And I think maybe some people think, oh, well, Gaddis figured it out and he was a stud. And the moment he's a stud, he's left. When you look at Weiss, the fact that he actually came in last season before the improvement, the whole situation, I don't really buy that the argument is as simple as old coordinator gone, team bad. I mean, do you agree with me on that?
Yeah, and I think that, like, and this is something that the people that follow our channel, like, we've taken heat from Michigan fans, and it turns out, like, if we are right, then this is a good thing. And you talk about this a lot with personnel too. Like, when you have personnel turnover, it's not always a bad thing. I something in the back of my mind, because I don't think that you go from Michigan to Miami if you're in a good place with your job. Something in the back of my mind, and we were talking about this before, tells me that maybe Gaddis was encouraged to go. And look, I'll give you another chance to circle back on the coaches, but I don't love, and just to give y'all more kind of transparency, we were talking about this before, and I told Josh, I said, Josh, I don't love the co-coordinator thing. I think it's trash. I hate it. And I've long been critical of Harbaugh, whose offenses are what struggled. Not his defense, not his physicality, not his personnel, not his recruiting. His offense is what struggled, and I feel like he's wanting to keep a little bit of attachment to the offense. And that's why he's not hiring these high-line names that would love to, I think, coach at Michigan, because that brand should be able to attract a top coordinator. But given my concerns with Gaddis in the past, and maybe not so much Gaddis, but the Gaddis hire in general, you don't hire somebody to learn on the job at Michigan. And what you were saying about Weiss, I have reason to be optimistic there from an offensive standpoint. And also, this is maybe where you get in the personnel, like a ton of people coming back, including a pretty important one at wide receiver.
Look, there's a lot of drama with Gaddis leaving, and the Michigan fans that are probably going to be the people listening to this know it. So I won't get into too much detail, right? But you've got the whole fling with the Vikings job. He made some comments about the level of appreciation at Michigan. And I do think it's fair to maybe take from that, I'm not saying that they were trying to fire him, and I don't think you were either. But the point is that Harbaugh might not have necessarily been trying to make sure he stayed at Michigan. I'm not quite sure that I've gotten that vibe. And so when you look at the fact that Weiss was in the NFL for a long time and goes to Michigan, there's sudden improvement while he's there. It may well be that Harbaugh just felt like Weiss was as good or better than Gaddis. And you know what? If Gaddis isn't really that into it and he's going to leave, so be it. Quite frankly, he probably overstayed his interest level in Alabama. And there's a lot of, I can tell you because we just tweeted about this, there's a lot of Alabama fans that feel like Gaddis's lack of interest in the bowl game was a crucial factor for them. But yeah, maybe let's talk on roster, because at the end of the day, I think people tend to focus on coordinators, because this is the Ohio State problem, I think. People see a coordinator as a single change that can change everything about a team. Same way people think you get a new quarterback and suddenly all your problems are going to go away. Yeah, sometimes a quarterback's a limiter, but if the quarterback's playing reasonably well within the system, it's probably a much more complicated problem. And I think coordinators are the same thing. So what does matter to me is this roster. You have 3 offensive line starters returning. You have a guy that was a Remington finalist and is a 6-year senior at center transferring in. You get a guy in Ronnie Bell that we have long said we thought was probably by far the most explosive player on that team. We felt like it was a huge blow when he went down last year, and somehow Michigan overcame it. But you take him, hopefully Corum, who's healthy, and you've got the potential for the offense to be at least as good as it was last year, and frankly, it should be better. This should be a better offense than Michigan has fielded in several years. And again, we keep drawing these Ohio State parallels because I think there's some puzzle pieces that match up in a scary way. Michigan has the ability to pound the rock and should be able to, and they're going to improve. And the area where Ohio State has a question mark, Michigan has a strength. So there's a lot of things Michigan's going to be able to do over the course of the season. Personally, I think it's interesting that the quarterback competition is still going on. I think if McCarthy had been healthy in the spring, I'm not sure you'd necessarily be in that boat. I kind of feel like the coaching staff letting things continue, it probably has something to do with the fact that they believe McCarthy is going to take the job from McNamara. and quite frankly, in the transfer era, you don't want to be too fast to pull the trigger on the senior not having a starting job, because we just saw what happened at LSU, where Miles Brennan just quit the team, and that happens, and somebody gets hurt, and suddenly your team's sunk. So the offensive side of the ball, I think, is stacked, and I'll say on the defensive side of the ball, which we'll get to later, there's a lot of new faces, but there's a lot of talent. So I'll flip it back to you. Let's talk about offense back and forth. Once we have that discussion, we'll talk about defense, and then maybe we'll sort of bring it all together.
Yeah, I mean, I think offensively, the running back room is crazy. Like, it's really good. Nobody's talking about it. It's really good. Yeah, you lose some pieces on offensive line, but then you get, a Remington like finalist coming in as a transfer, which is pretty unheard of. I think that talking about Bell is a big thing because we mentioned on our show last year how like I was watching that game and I saw him get hurt after making a crazy catch. Like 2 plays later he gets hurt and I'm like that's the heart and soul of that offense. Like so they overcame that, but him coming back is huge. I don't know that they haven't named a starter yet because of anything other than that maybe Harbaugh is going to play 2 quarterbacks again. Like I think that that's a legitimate possibility. They both have different skill sets. I could see that happening again. That doesn't shock me at all. But in general, I think the offense is going to be at least what it was last year, if not better. Like last year with those pieces, they were 16th in scoring. I could see them cracking the top 10, especially given that their schedule I think is a little bit lighter this year, a little bit easier. But, I know you said defense, but I think this is a decent segue into talking about how maybe that schedule is going to tell some lies, and offense might be one of them.
Yeah, I think it could tell some lies in a couple different ways, because Colorado State, Hawaii, UConn, and Maryland are not gonna really put up much of a fight. And on the offensive side of the ball, I think people may feel like this is the best Michigan offense in history. Just because when you have so many veteran players coming back, particularly these days, I feel like you tend to be a lot better out of the gate. And when you play lower level teams, you're just going to blast them. I mean, that's my expectation, is that Michigan's going to come out just putting up a number on guys for the first several weeks. Slide aside there, but it's kind of scary to think if Michigan had actually managed to get Xavier Worthy enrolled, then we'd really be talking. But, it is what it is. I think as we said, the shift's going to be that Iowa game, and a couple weeks later you get Penn State, Michigan State. I get that, but there's going to be a shift where suddenly you switch to teams that are much more traditional Big Ten defense football. And I know Michigan State and Penn State have the potential to be good offensively. I think the jury is still sort of out there on exactly what we're going to get from them. But I certainly think going into that Iowa game, you're going to have a certain view, probably coming out of the Iowa game, just necessarily because of who Iowa is. Certain people are going to overreact. Now, I think if you're a Michigan fan, you kind of know what it's like to go to Kinnick. And I don't think it's a trap game, because Michigan is going to be playing their first major game. They're going to be looking forward to it. It's the advantage of not having a major non-conference opponent. They're kind of going to be ready to bust some heads. But I will turn a little bit to the defense now and say the problem for Michigan is replacing 2 superstar pass rushers. Now, the better you think Aiden Hutchinson is, the more of a loss you think this is. And so mentioned earlier my point on losing players and retaining them. I often talk about with the NFL draft. You always want to see your guys go early because it's good for your program. And you like to see it for the kids, though. Somebody's going to get drafted in the first 32 picks. So, the opportunity is kind of equal no matter what happens to any individual kid. But you like to see it from your team because it's a good reflection of where your program's at, and then it helps you a lot in recruiting. But from an evaluation perspective, I am kind of a little bit the opposite. When you see kids go in the draft, if you see kids go higher than you think they were going to go, that's an indication that the roster was a little better, and what they're losing is a little more important than you thought. If you see them go low in the draft, that means, the coaches maybe were doing more with those kids than you had expected. 2 big examples on that. One would be the 2019 LSU team. Everybody knew the offense was loaded. Now, those guys went crazy high, like Jamar Chase and Burrow and everything. I think set a record right for first-round draft picks. But the thing that struck me was how many defensive players were going really high. It was Queen was a linebacker, and a lot of other guys in that defense were going very high in the draft. And they ended up having 14 guys drafted. That said a lot because their defense really wasn't great for most of the year, but they lost apparently a much better set of talent than I had really anticipated. Another example would be, probably 2018 with Alabama in the defensive draft, and this is what we're kind of related to another set of tweets we had today. That 2018 offensive unit from Alabama was incredibly loaded, but not many of those guys actually went pro after the 2018 season. What they had from a veterancy perspective was a lot of defenders, and the defenders did not go as high in the draft as most people expected. They had a lot of guys that went very low or were undrafted free agents, and I think that was an indication that that team, that Clemson game, this wasn't complete fluke. Now, there's a lot of injuries going into it, but you can sort of piece out in your head why they got to the position they are. Why do I have that whole tangent? Because, Aiden Hutchinson, we think is a really, really good player. I am not sold that he was the number one overall pick sort of hype that some people put on him, but that is a positive for this season. By the same token, I'm not so sure that he was quite as irreplaceable as people want to say. Now, I think the pair of him and Ajabo is certainly going to be very hard to replace. But him, Ajabo, Dax Hill, which I think you have opinions. I'll let you bury yourself with them in a minute. I don't think those guys are completely irreplaceable. And there is talent at Michigan, and there is really good development. There's a lot of athleticism. Like, I think the linebacking core has a lot of guys that played last year and can step in. I think they're figuring things out in the secondary. There's guys that are going to have to learn on the job, but again, you've got time. I think Michigan's going to end up fielding a good defense. So when you look at the pieces that left and where I'm at with them, yeah, they lost a couple pieces in particular that were really good, but they've still got talent. They still got good development, and they've got a really good core. So I think they're going to I would think this is going to turn into a really good football team. And I'll say, maybe slight spoiler alert, it's interesting to me that Michigan is viewed the way they are with this roster and the turnover they had, and that Notre Dame, for whatever reason, is viewed as a top 5 team with the roster they have.
Yeah, I think the roster's there, and I think that's what the national media is overlooking. They see a few names that they recognize leaving and don't realize that Michigan does develop well. And look, I know there's Ohio State fans that are watching that are going to be like, oh, you're being positive on us and you're being positive on them. No, we think both of these teams are really good. We just think that everybody is giving Ohio State the credit they deserve and not giving Michigan the credit they deserve. And that's the thing that bothers me about all this is like, and you say that past, performance doesn't predict future results, but I do think that coming into the season without losing, a ton of people and being the champion deserves a little more respect than Michigan's getting right now. The one thing I'll say, and this is where I think Michigan fans are going to get off the bus with us a little bit throughout the year. And you alluded to it. We're going to over scrutinize and be hypercritical of how they perform in these games if they're struggling. Because now, based on last year, you take the good with the bad, now we're holding Michigan to a championship standard. Because the Big Ten champion is a national championship contender, which means now you get the Alabama treatment, the Georgia, the Ohio State treatment, in that if you week 4 beat Maryland 32-27, we're going to get you for it. And I don't know that Michigan fans are ready for that, but I hope that they see that as a compliment. Because one, your schedule is weak. That's okay. For the most part, you can't help it. You can't help that Indiana is probably not going to be great this year, or that Nebraska may not be very good this year. You can't help that.
Or that UCLA flaked out
right
before they rejoin the conference.
You can't help those things. You can help how you perform, and that's how in the past we've treated like a lot of these teams that don't play like a ranked team all year, like G5s or whatever, and then they struggle with bad teams. That's an indicator that you're not championship material. So what I need to see from Michigan this year, and what I think that they can do, is dominate. That Iowa game is going to tell me a lot. And like you said, I'm not going to scrutinize the offense that much. It's the defense, or the defense that much. It's the offense. But yeah, I think that's where we are with Michigan. And so we've gone pretty long on this one. But wrap it up for us. Tie it in a bow. Just your thoughts on Michigan heading into this year. Maybe something that we need to be looking for.
My overall take on Michigan, as I said, is I feel like the drop from whatever third they finished last year to eighth is honestly kind of disrespectful. But I also don't know that I would have them third. I mean, I kind of think they're in like the 5 to 6 range. I think they're, as I said, I think Notre Dame should maybe be a little lower, Michigan a little higher. We'll talk about Notre Dame in a minute. Really not a dig on Notre Dame because you're still talking top 8 territory. My big takeaway from Michigan in this season is to see can Harbaugh sustain the kind of step forward he took last year. We went into last season talking about what expectations should be if you're a Michigan fan. Should it be reasonable for you to expect 10 or 11 wins in a season? And you know what? They delivered. So it kind of ended up being a moot point. So this year, the question is, can they sustain 9, 10, 11 wins in a season? Because I think if you're Michigan, your expectation is, hey, we should be kind of at this level every year. We really shouldn't be losing more than 3 games in a season. We shouldn't be worse than 10-3 when the bowl game's said and done on a continual basis. And I think I don't think there's any excuse for this coaching staff if things don't turn out well. Your roster is in a much better position than what Michigan State brings back. You're a better team than what Penn State brings back. You're a better team in a lot of ways than Iowa, who's maybe well coached, but they don't have the talent level. And basically everybody else on your schedule but Ohio State should be seriously outmatched. There's no excuse in my mind for this coaching staff to drop 3 games with this roster, unless the defense is just a lot worse than I expect, which we'll see out of the gate. So yeah, that's where I am. I think if you're a Michigan fan, your expectations should be high. I have a reputation as the Grim Reaper, but I'm that way because I'm honest, and there are not that many teams that are real national title contenders. I am not sure Michigan is a genuine title contender. I'll get that out of the way. I think they're a contender to make the playoff. Not really sold with this roster when you compare them to the Alabamas and the Georgias, that they're going to be able to get to the playoff and then compete kind of like we saw last year. But let's cross that road when we get to it. At the moment, I see them as a genuine playoff contender.
And the one thing I will say is, in terms of losing people, Michigan versus Georgia last year isn't a great analog to this year, at least on paper coming in, because Georgia lost a ton of people. And that Georgia game, and I'm glad that y'all are here and you've hung out this far, because I feel like we lost some Michigan fans when we did the Michigan-Georgia preview last year, because we both picked a multiple touchdown win for Georgia, and it was really a matchup thing. Like we even said, Michigan's actually would do better against Alabama than they would against Georgia. It was just a matchup thing. And a lot of Michigan fans got mad at us, but that's what we do here. Is we're honest. We take our losses when we lose, and we're not taking a victory lap here. We're just saying that, like, where we were, where Michigan fans got mad at us last year for being honest about the Georgia game, we saw some things in the matchups. They should then appreciate what we're saying now, because we're a lot higher on Michigan than maybe the national media. So that's it for us, y'all. Michigan fans, let us know in the comments. 1, are we right about UCLA backing out? Is that the whole deal this year on the schedule? And 2, if you're giving an honest look and taking your fan hat off, do you think that the national media is not giving you your due? Let us know about it. We'll talk about it. We'll mix it up with you in the comments. Remember, NIL Series, if you want to hear us talk more. We've also done a lot more previews. Got more coming after this. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week. God bless.